Hi everybody, welcome to the second video of my little series where I go into the development of kinetics, um, some of my past history, and also just some other things kind of that are tangential, just to give you all a lead up to the release of book 5, which comes out December 25th. So today I will be talking about the pre 9/11 version of kinetics. And 9/11 was pretty significant change and situation for a lot of people in the United States. Um, if you were here, I feel like it really changed a lot of the ethos of what it meant to be an American, and which is debatable if it was a good thing or not. So, but for me, it was a significant change in how I approach storytelling. Um, so the pre 9/11 version was started because my parents were having an argument and I just needed to get away and write something down, and I came up with the very first version of kinetics. At the time, it was not called kinetics. That was something that came later. This version was actually called the Institute for Telekinetic Research, and it was very much based off of a lot of the things that I had been reading at the time. I was very, very into things like ESP and aliens and all kinds of other little other little things like that. Um, so I I I had a lot to put into it because, the idea of like having powers and superpowers and just anything like that was just so intriguing to me that, like, I mean, I grew up on Star Wars, the Force, and having like a lightsaber was just like, oh, give it to me now, I want it. And I was definitely one of those kids that I'd be sitting at like a dinner table just being like, I can move the fork, I can move the fork. And so I think it was just kind of a natural conclusion that some of the storytelling that I was doing was going to be about people with powers. Um, Growing up, I was very fond of Superman and Spider-Man. I feel like there was another superhero that I was really into, but those two were like my core favorites. I would sit in the library and just read the the Death and Return of Superman over and over again, and Ultimate Spider-Man. Like, those were my favorites. Like, Spider-Man is still probably one of my all-time favorites, and um, the movies are debatably good sometimes and debatably bad sometimes as well. Um, but I have enjoyed every iteration of Superman and Spider-Man that have come out. Um, so, like, I think there's a lot with those characters that speaks to me a lot, and that's in their the way that they handle morality. Like, Superman is great because he's this character that you know is finding his humanity in everything around him. He's got this mission that he's supposed to be on, or thinks he's supposed to be on, from Krypton, and what we get is this guy who's just trying to find the best way to be a human being, and all of that. Like, that at its core is the best thing about Superman. And Spider-Man, like, he's just this kid. He's just this stupid, funny kid who's again just trying to find his way and live up to this, promise that he made to his uncle, or you know, after the fact, after he died. Spoiler alert. um, but that phrase, "with great power comes great responsibility," has constantly echoed through my mind. yeah, as long as I've been reading comics, I think that 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 kind of like you're up against something really really huge, and you have a and you if you have something in your hands like a power, an ability of some kind, then you have to treat it with a great deal of responsibility. And if you don't, then you end up like hurting other people or hurting yourself or doing something that's incredibly selfish that doesn't help, that ultimately hurts. And so like I say this about, I revealed my nerdhood with Spider-Man and Superman, um to say that I again was very very into like complex morality of characters. And and so when I started creating my own story and my own characters, I was struggling a lot with the concept of evil. So it was pretty obvious to me as a kid that your story's got to have some kind of like a villain or an antagonist. And I don't know that at the time I really knew those terms. I I'd started doing some like reading of like craft books, uh, probably starting around like 10, 11 years old. So I had some grasp of like the terminology around writing, but um, but nothing had really like taught me how to like execute it or how to put it in a way that made sense, at least not to me. So with these morally gray, morally complex characters, like I wanted something like that. I didn't I was struggling so much with the development of my characters in that early version. Like I had a story, I had a plot, and that was all well and good. Um, but I really felt like there was something missing with the characters themselves that I didn't really know how to deal with. And part of that was, I think, what I really wanted was some morally gray aspect. And being that I was 11 years old and had a very black and white view of good and evil, or at least an a basic understanding, it it was harder to figure out how to put those kinds of nuances in. Um, so so a lot of what I was working on in those early days was just trying to figure out who the antagonist was, who the protagonist was, which it was obviously like Willow and Eugene. At the time, this is funny. At the time, in the Institute for Telekinetic Research, Willow was actually called Andrea. Um, and the reasoning why I changed it from that name was because I can't remember exactly when it happened, but there was a lady who um, ended up drowning her children in a bathtub, and her name was also Andrea, and I couldn't handle having a character with that same name, and just feeling like that connection there. So I changed it, and I actually ended up naming Willow after the character Willow from Buffy, even though I'd only seen like a handful of episodes at the time. I just I really really liked the name, and and since then people have been like, "Oh, you named your character after yourself," because my name is Arbor, my character's name was Willow. Tree names, clearly, obviously, it's related. And I was like, no, I definitely did not name my character after myself. Like the closest I could say I came to naming my character after myself was giving that original character a name with the same first letter. Like that's about as close as I would have gotten uh, to naming a character after myself. Um, so yeah, I was very very fond of names and naming things. So one of the things that we did when I was a kid was I would spend a lot of time staring at maps. I was very fond of maps. Um, because we were traveling quite a bit at the time, my dad would have these huge, like, Rand McNally National Geographic, like road maps, and I would just trace our path from, one state to the next, just on those things, and then try to pick out new paths that we could go. And so I would daydream. I daydreamed a lot. Um, and one of the things that I really really liked to do was daydream about the places that I was seeing on these maps. Um, and so Eugene was actually named after Eugene, Oregon, because I had decided that the Institute for Telekinetic Research was actually going to be based in that area. Um, because I like the idea of it being like lots of forest over there and right next to the ocean and not that far from the desert. And this is one of those things that's very, very obviously like a pull from Animorphs. Um, so throughout the series, Animorphs, the conceit is that these kids, they don't tell you what their last names are, they don't tell you where they're at, but you can kind of pick up from context clues that they're near ocean and forests and desert. And I just, like, you know before we got to the end of the series and figured out where exactly these characters were, like, it was like, oh, I know exactly where these characters are, because I can see on these road maps exactly where you can find access to all three of those things really easily, and that's in California. Um, and so, kind of going from there, like, I was very, very into like forests, and oh my gosh, I spent so much time just staring out the window while we were driving from place to place, just daydreaming about like having a tree house in the woods. And like a secret hideout where I could just like live out all my daydreams, whatever they were, which was just at that point living on my own. And I really wanted to like run away from home and live in the woods and have a tree house and have a pet dog and just all these things. Like, um I was a researcher, and I very much would spend hours and hours in the library reading about how to track prey and how to make weapons and fires and like what one of my favorite little anecdotes about learning words was that I did not know how to spell the word edible. Um, and so when I was looking up books on like edible plants, I kept writing it eatable. Um, Gosh, I had to have been like, yeah, that was probably like 11, 12, around that same age range. Um, and I was able to find a field guide on it and learn how to spell. That's how I know how to spell the word edible, is because I was looking for books on edible plants. Um, because I was very determined that I was going to run away and live in the woods. One of the other influences I had as a kid was the book Hatchet by Gary Paulson. I would read that book over and over and over again, and pretty much anything where you had some kid off alone in the woods, it was like I was like, give it to me, I will consume it. Um, and so I part of the original version of Kinetics, so the ITR, or Institute for Telekinetic Research, was about this girl named Andrea who, she was living in a research institute and believed herself to be an orphan. And and because she was in this institute that was trying to research telekinesis and stuff like that, they were trying to encourage her to display powers, and she had decided that she didn't want to be here. She ended up going sneaking around one night and finds out that she was not an orphan, that she had actually been stolen from her family. um, and she decided that it was time to leave. So she escapes from the institute and makes her way into the woods, and ends up coming across a talking wolf. Um, whose name was uh, Caliph or Caliph. I didn't know how to pronounce it at the time, so I just pronounced it Caliph. Um, I had looked up in the dictionary. You're gonna find out that I'm a super nerd. I would read encyclopedias and I would read dictionaries and spend a whole lot of time in the library. So I was looking in the dictionary or the thesaurus trying to find other names for the word king, because I wanted Caliph to be um, like a you know he was at the time like kind of a lone wolf, but he was also a king. So I had this whole thing with the wolf and why he was talking, um, and I don't remember now if if the Andrea at the time had the ability to talk to animals, or if Khalif himself was just a talking animal. I don't remember what that particular distinction was, because that ended up changing later on into something else. Um, uh, so, but anyway, so like Khalif leads her to a treehouse in the woods, and that's where she stays. And then ultimately, she ends up in a small town that's not that far away, and she meets Eugene. And Eugene basically has everything that she wants, which is a family and like the very tight knit like people around him, and they become friends and blah 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 blah. He also has powers, so he's the first one to actually teach her how to use her powers outside of the Institute for Telekinetic Research. And um and then like that was kind of where those first 21 pages ended, about there. So later, after I transcribed it on the computer and stuff, I had gotten around to like adding some more context about Eugene as a character, and like who the antagonist was. So some more things about names. I was very I would look at things around me and just pick names. So I'm pretty sure I picked up Andrea from something I had seen, like in a newspaper or on a book or something like that, and that's why she was called Andrea. Eugene was obviously named after Eugene, Oregon. His last name, and the reason why he is a Japanese American, is because above the computer where I would sit and write was a Sanyo microwave. And and so because of that Sanyo microwave, I was like, okay, Eugene is going to be, his last name is going to be Sanyo. I ended up later changing it because I was like, there's no way I'm going to name a character after after a microwave. Like, that is ridiculous. So, uh, um, unfortunately, he was named after a microwave. So, um, I had I think it was a University of Arizona T-shirt that I really like to wear, and I was trying to come up with the name for the primary antagonist at the time, and I looked at my shirt and I was just like, Ryzen, because that's all I could see, because I couldn't see the A on either end of the thing. I was like, okay, this guy's last name is Ryzen, and that character, he ended up changing into what I don't know. I think his role got shifted and like pulled apart quite a bit in the later versions, but he was the director of the institute, and um he was going to, he led everything, and he was kind of the bad guy, and then he had um a henchman named John, um Jon, and I'm pretty sure John was named after the John from the Garfield comics. Um, I had no scruples at all. Just was just like, oh, I like that name, mine now. Um, and Anyway, so John is actually the the character who would end up becoming Jacob. So Eugene's older brother um, was this character, kind of like the role that he filled, which at the time they weren't related in the early version. So John and then Ryzen, Dr. Ryzen, um, and like I kind of struggled with those two. So you have John and you have Dr. Ryzen as kind of the antagonists, and you know John is one of these people who has some kind of like there's some kind of ulterior motive there. Then you're not you, but you as the reader are not sure what that motive is, and he's being pressured by Dr. Ryzen to do stuff that he may not be wanting to do. So that was where I was kind of playing with that complex morality a little bit, but I kept hitting this wall with Ryzen. I was like, okay, why does Ryzen do what he does? And that why kind of kept pushing me to figure out what is the reasoning for this person's motivations. And one of the genres that I tended to read a lot at this time was actually like mystery thrillers. So a lot of Lawrence Block, like I like a lot of the classics, like Raymond Chandler, Maltese Falcon, that kind of stuff. So I was used to reading like that kind of detective fiction, and I don't know that it really helped me all that much to sort of understand, like, because I remember one of the craft books I had read was like, writing mysteries and how your bad guys have to have a modus operandi, or a mode of operation, uh, and so I was kind of constantly trying to think of like what is the reasoning for why these characters behave the way they behave, and I tended to focus more on that with the villains than I did with, or the antagonists than I did with the protagonists. So that was actually a struggle that didn't really come about until much later, because it was like my good characters are, they're just good. We understand them. We understand their motivations. They just want to do good things, and this largely simplistic, but at the same time, it was easier to focus on the villains, because there was a challenge there to figure out like why. And I want to say that it was probably close to either right after or right before 9/11 where I finally came up with the alien aspect of the story, which I'm trying to remember exactly, but it's really hard. I have not really spent a whole lot of time with the very, very first version of the story in a really long time. Like, I've started to rewrite it in a couple ways and try and find a new way to actually still tell that story, because Kinetics as it is very different. But that original story still has something that I still want to tell. Like, I still want to tell whatever story that was. And I've got a good chunk of it sort of rewritten down in a new version, and it'll ultimately, whenever I get that finished, it'll kind of fit in between, I think, books 2 and 3. Yeah, I still really want to write that story, but there was this roadblock that I kept hitting, not only with like the antagonists, but also with the story itself, because I couldn't figure out what I wanted the end to be. And when I did finally figure out an end, which was, oh, there's a big battle at the end and everybody wins, and I had come up with like dozens of characters who were unfortunately all named after my cousins, and and yeah, like, so there's a lot of names in the books that still remain where they're definitely named after cousins of mine, and I feel kind of bad because I'm just like, I'm sorry, my cousin named Jacob, who you're now named after one of the bad guys. I'm sorry, I didn't think of you that way. but but yeah, um so the story itself was starting to be a struggle, as well as trying to figure out the motivations of the villains, um because I just felt like it wasn't like, sure, I could tell that story with that big battle at the end and it would be fine, but it didn't feel right. There was something about it that just didn't feel like it was telling the story that I wanted to tell. I'd lost sense of my original two characters, like, you know, Andrea and Eugene at the time. There was something in, their two characters that I wanted to explore, and the scope of the book that I had been writing or trying to write was just not doing it. Like, I kept adding more and more elements because I was trying to like push it further and further, and it just wasn't getting far enough. And that's where it kind of like stuck for a really long time. Um, and then 9/11 happened, and literally that day, I was sitting there and I was watching a Harrison Ford movie called Clear and Present Danger, which is a political thriller, if you're unfamiliar with it. And like, I that was the thing I was doing on 9/11, was watching a movie about terrorists. so so that happened, and yeah, everything kind of changed after that, because it was really distressing to sit there and watch the news with my dad, who was really good at explaining to us a lot of like context around things that was happening in world politics, and to realize that there was more going on in the real world, and more complex, things coming into play. Like, yeah, America was attacked, and it was terrible, and it was a tragedy, but there was a reason why. There was a very, very significant reason why, and whether you think that's a good reason or a bad reason doesn't matter. There was a reason, and that's stuck in my head as something I needed to pay attention to, not only from a maneuvering through the world as a human being, but also maneuvering through stories as a writer. Was that you can have a tragedy, but there's like this entire pantheon of things that have happened that have come about to cause that, and like that single event, you know it had reasons, and I needed to find reasons for these characters and these situations to actually be at play. So I think I sat on that for a couple years, and I don't really remember, you know, touching kinetics outside of, or at least the Institute for Telekinetic Research, outside of what I'd already written, um, until I was about, I think, 16. So 16 was when I, you know, I think we were, at that point, we were settled into a house in Tennessee, and um, uh, I was doing some. I think we were driving up to Washington D.C. for some kind of protest or something, and um, I sat there on. I had a laptop at that point, and I sat there on that laptop, and I wrote the, the the what I call the Kinetics Handbook, and it basically has all the world information. It has like, books that were written about the situation, and I almost completely changed the story. So it shifted the location from Oregon to Ohio, and I couldn't even begin to tell you why I picked Ohio. It just seemed like, I don't know, something out of the Twilight Zone. I think with a few times that we'd driven through there, and I was just like, good, perfect. Everything, it looks too normal. It's not right. so so I picked, Columbus, Ohio as the place where this story would would go, um and I kind of just shifted everything on its head, completely changed the story around, and a lot of it had to do with like the scope of the story I was trying to tell and the stuff that I wanted to do with my characters was too small. And I realized that. And so so that kind of concludes like the pre 9/11 era. There's probably some other stuff in there that I could tell, but that's pretty much it. Like that I at least got the characters from that version, and then realized that I was very attached to them. So the characters I had recently have gone back and reread some of my old favorite books, and one of them was The Face on the Milk Carton by Carolyn B. Cooney. Carolyn Cooney. I can't remember what her middle initial is, but I had read that book as a kid and been so attached to the two characters. Like there's Janie, who's the main character, and then her little boyfriend. I can't remember his name, but I realized rereading that like about a year or so ago that I was like, oh no, my characters Willow and Eugene are just fan fiction versions of those characters. And so once again, I persist in stealing the things that I like, including my characters. Like they're my characters now. They're definitely my characters now, but I can see the genetics of their origin in my head by going back and rereading all these things that I'd read when I was younger. So like, yeah, it really counted for a lot. Oh, and then I think it was probably around this time that my dad introduced us to Joseph Campbell. And that is where I will leave this video, because if you know anything about Star Wars, you know that Joseph Campbell helped, with his ideas to bring it to fruition, at least, here and there. Anyway, yeah, thank you for listening once again. I am really, really happy to be talking about my books and stuff, and I hope that this is, informative and interesting. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. I will try and get them in the next one. And book 5 releases on December 25th, and yeah, I will see you all next time. Thanks for listening.